BYU's far more impressive than Central Florida. I mean, I would have I thought Central Florida was going to be the worst team in this league, Joe. They have done a couple of things well, which I'll talk about, but there's no question that BYU is the more impressive team. They're the better team. And this was the type of road trip that they warned you about, that we talked about all preseason. Okay, these teams are moving to the Big 12. Like, talk about the travel. I know I did shows with Drew and we brought this up, but here's your Orlando to Lubbock to Provo road trip right here, Joe. That's what Central Florida is going to have to face. They played at Texas Tech in Lubbock over the weekend. It was a strong effort. They came up short. I do believe they covered, but did not win. And now it's out to Provo to play a Tuesday game against BYU. And and then, of course, the other thing we talked about is the gauntlet that is the Big 12. This is going to be UCF's fourth straight game against a ranked opponent, which is just
Oof.
Big 12 basketball at this point. And they, to UCF's credit, they beat one of those opponents. They beat Oklahoma, and they beat Kansas and Texas as well this year. So
Yeah.
that's something that I think, give Johnny Dawkins all the credit in the world, because this is not a roster that has Big 12 caliber players, in my opinion. They're down near the bottom in terms of like talent on the roster. But so far this year, like, props to Dawkins, because he's managed. Like, I thought this team could have went over in this conference potentially, and he's already
Oof.
managed to beat Kansas, Texas, and Oklahoma, which is extremely impressive. However, UCF on the road 1-5, and this will be arguably their toughest road task of the season. Of course, I already talked about the travel, but going and having to play BYU and Provo, regardless if you just played in Lubbock or not, is no easy task. BYU, of course, kind of just been chilling at home. They were home over the weekend, got it done against Kansas State, did not cover. But I think they could potentially cover here. And I'm hoping, Joe, that one of these big favorites gets like bet down a little bit, so I can
Yeah.
punch back, because I could see BYU just blowing UCF out of the water here. If you go back to the first meeting, that was in Orlando. It was, I think, off memory, BYU wasn't coming, was in a little bit of a tough spot, and UCF did what they do, kind of grinded the game to a halt, played really good defense, but still lost 63-58. And
Mm.
that's just not typically what happens to BYU at home. At home, think of when Texas went there a couple weeks ago, like, and the line was like 7.5, and people thought it was too big, and then BYU just like did whatever they wanted and won that game easily. BYU's offense works a little bit better at home. They shoot it better, almost similar to, like I was talking about, Dayton. Their shooting numbers are better at home. Offensive efficiency a little bit better at home. They're one of the best. Like, they move the ball as good as any team I've seen. The way they pass the ball around the perimeter is elite. They score 83 points per game, which is top 20 nationally. And I just
Oof.
think those elite offensive metrics that BYU has are going to show up here, where they didn't really show up in the first game, right? Like, it was more like, let's get in, let's get out. They got the win, did what they have to do. Here, I think there could be a little bit more emphasis to just put this game away. And that's what leads me to wanting to lay the number. Now, 11 seems big, but over the weekend, I think they were 11.5 at one point against Kansas. I think that's probably Kansas State. I'm sorry. I think that's where it went off. And I've got Kansas State power rated, quite a bit higher than UCF at this point. I know they're probably close from like what the odds makers would make them, but I've got Kansas State above UCF. And you throw in the travel, having to go play in Lubbock and then play BYU on the back end on like a weeknight spot. They had to stay out there, like they didn't go home, so they've been on the road for a few days. I think it's a tough ask for a UCF team that's 1-5 on the road this year, and just does not have the caliber of player that BYU does, in my opinion. So I would lay it here. One of these two big favorites is going to get there, and I'll have to figure
Right.
out from tonight or tomorrow if I can pick the right one. But one of these two big favorites is going to smash someone at home tomorrow, either Dayton or BYU. But man, this certainly sets up for a blowout BYU win here, Joe.